Welcome to East Asia Inter-Regional Dialogue 2020, hosted by Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat. This year's theme is COVID-19 pandemic and ways to future-oriented trilateral cooperation and beyond. Good afternoon. My name is Bong Gun-jeon. I'll be moderating today's dialogue. Let us begin with today's dialogue with the opening remarks by Ambassador Michigami Hisashi, Secretary General of Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat. Ambassador.
Thank you, Professor. Good afternoon. Welcome to the East Asia Inter-Regional Dialogue 2020. On behalf of the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat, TCS, I'd like to extend my appreciation to all the distinguished professors, researchers, and audience from CJK, ASEAN, and beyond. TCS has been annually holding this inter-regional dialogue since 2017 with eminent scholars who have insightful opinions. The dialogue aims to facilitate mutual understanding and pragmatic cooperation among different stakeholders. In the COVID-19 pandemic, today's dialogue can be more significant. Ladies and gentlemen, China, Japan, and Korea, CJK, are world major economies. As you can see on the screen, 24% of the world GDP and 50% of car production. Very big proportion. The Trilateral Cooperation started in 1999 when the CJK leaders had a breakfast meeting on the sideline of ASEAN +3 summit. And then the Independent Trilateral Summit started in 2008. And TCS, our organization, was established in 2011 to support and facilitate the cooperation. The Trilateral Cooperation has developed into 21 ministerial meetings. The next slide, please. Excuse me. Next slide, please. No, not that one. Ministerial meeting, the former one. Yes, thank you. Now we have 21 ministerial meetings and 70 intergovernmental mechanisms covering all important fields like foreign affairs, economy and trade, health, environment, disaster management, culture, education, science and technology, tourism, and so on. The Trilateral Cooperation originally started in the context of the ASEAN +3. Last year, at the ASEAN +3 summit, leaders reiterated their commitment to the cooperation. At that summit meeting, actually, I was at the meeting. My left hand was His Excellency Mr. Mahathir from Malaysia, and next Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi from Myanmar. On my right hand, I had 3 CJK leaders. I had clear memory that ASEAN leaders called for closer cooperation between CJK and ASEAN in the fields of environment, aging society, disaster management, small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, in the serious damage by the COVID-19, East Asian countries are trying to revive economy and safeguard people's welfare. A special ASEAN +3 summit was held in April. The CJK online ministerial meetings, online meetings of foreign ministers, health ministers, and transport ministers were also convened during the pandemic. Unfortunately, global economies are shrinking. The divide between the rich and poor is widened. The World Bank estimated an additional 90 million people to fall into extreme poverty. The COVID-19 poses serious threat to human security. The vulnerable is most severely affected. The world is now seeking for rapid economic recovery, which is of course necessary. At the same time, our human security foundation has been now undermined. We need to enhance the foundations for a people-centered, inclusive approach for achieving the SDGs. TCS has been actively contributing to both governmental and non-governmental corporations. On one hand, for the governmental meetings, TCS has been doing several projects such as joint study on e-commerce or environment teachers exchange program. On the other hand, TCS has been conducting projects for private sectors, business, culture, local government, young people, academia, media, to facilitate people-to-people exchange. We also organized 10+3 Young Researchers Exchange by inviting researchers from ASEAN. East Asian Business Council and TCS published a booklet on supply chain connectivity in ASEAN+3. During this pandemic, we have hosted 2 webinars. One is, as you can see again on the screen, COVID-19. Managing COVID-19 pandemic experiences of China, Japan, Korea, with leading epidemiologists from the 3 countries and WHO. We had, by our standard, had a exceptional success. We had 9,000 viewers from 70 countries. And the second one is webinar on CJK Smart Cities. We also published Trilateral Statistics 2019 and research report on CJK Local City Exchange in this year. Next year will be our 10th anniversary. Entering its new phase of development, we are devoted to play a more important role for the Trilateral Cooperation at various levels. Today, we will shed light on the importance of CJK Trilateral Cooperation and ASEAN+3 framework. We can and should share experiences, including overcoming COVID-19. I'd like to listen to your views, suggestions, any ideas. And I expect fruitful outcome today. Thank you so much.
Again, this is Professor Jeon Bong-gun from Korea National Diplomatic Academy. I'll be moderating this session for the next 80 minutes, about 80 minutes. I'm very glad and honored to welcome you all this online interregional dialogue. And also I would like to express my deep appreciation to Ambassador Michigami Isashi, Secretary General of the TCS, for hosting this timely and important interregional dialogue. I think in this region, as well as the whole world, we are living in an age of uncertainty and crisis, not just a singular crisis, but multiple ones. Over the past years or decade, global political, economic, natural environment have worsened drastically and fast. Daily, we are experiencing adverse side effects of globalization, accelerated climate change, natural disaster. And this year, we have a COVID-19 pandemic. As Ambassador Michigami showed us, there are numerous regional efforts to cooperate together and cope with this COVID-19. But still, as an observer and a scholar, I think we are somewhat short of full potential of regional cooperation. In this context, this dialogue, and we are going to look into what's going on in this region, what are consequences and impacts of COVID-19, and how countries and the regions are coping with it, individually or together as a region. And also, we will discuss future roads we're going to take to make this region much prosperous and peaceful region in the world. As we all know, this region is somewhat, especially Northeast Asia, like any part of the world, lacking regional cooperative mechanism. We are fortunate to have this TCS, but other than that, compared to other regions, still we need to work on. That's how these scholars are assessing. I think in that sense, we are going to have a very meaningful dialogue today. For today's dialogue, we have invited 5 excellent scholars from the region. They are known for deep knowledge for decades in this field. I will briefly introduce our speakers, and you may find their full bio in the TCS program or internet, as they are well-known scholars in their fields. I'll follow the order of their names as they appear in the program. First, you may wave your hand and your name the name is called. Dr. Jia Daojun is a professor in the School of International Studies and the Institute of South Cooperation and Development in Beijing University. Before joining Beijing University, he also taught political science at the Renmin University, International University of Japan, and the University of Macau. Secondly, Dr. Terada Takashi, hello, is a professor of international relations and the head of political science department at the Toshiba University. I'm sorry, Toshiba University. Earlier, he also taught at the National University of Singapore, Waseda University. His research area covered international political economy in Asia and the Pacific. And also, he was doing research on Asian regionalism and the regional integration. Next, Dr. Che Mi is an Associate Research Fellow at the ASEAN Institute of Policy Studies, based here in Seoul. Before joining ASEAN Institute, Dr. Che worked as a research professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy together with me. And also he worked as a researcher in the ROK Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Sejong Institute. Her areas of research covers Korea-Japan relations and regionalism in Northeast Asia. She played a key role. She was a key person in putting together our Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperation Initiative during the last almost 7 and 8 years. Next, we have Dr. Kwik Jung Chi. He's an associate professor and head of Center for Asian Studies at the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies. Previously, he was a postdoctoral research associate in Princeton, Harvard, China and the World Program. Dr. Quick's research concentrates on weak states of foreign policy, regional multilateralism, and East Asian security, China-ASEAN relations, among others. And finally, Dr. Do Min Tu is a Deputy Director General of the Institute for Foreign Policy and Strategic Studies in Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. This DAV is our counterpart in Vietnam, I believe. Before joining Diplomatic Academy, she also worked at the Department of Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam. And also, she also served as a country coordinator for several academic networks. Her research area covers regional trade arrangement, Vietnam's economic integration, and the ASEAN economic integration. These speakers will present, among others, the assessments of our responses to corona pandemic and the situation of regional cooperation, and also their suggestions for our better responses to pandemic and the economic development, economic reactivation in the region. We prepared, I think they prepared the opening remarks for 8 to 10 minutes, and then there will be a Q&A sessions. We expect a very lively, stimulating, and constructive dialogue today. As we are scholars and academicians, I hope we could engage in a dialogue more freely and with less restrictions. I believe that the TCS intended in that way when they invited scholars and experts instead of governmental officials. Though it's going to be a short 90-minute session, but at the end of the seminar dialogue, we are going to come up with some specific answers to the problem that we have, and also we are going to go home with lots of homework to do, so that we could continue our research. Without further ado, I will begin with Dr. Cha Dao-Jung. Please, you have floor.
Thank you very much. I was at your office over there in Seoul a couple of years back. I have good memories. It's a pleasure to join the panel and share a couple of my own observations. Next, please. The slides, can you move the slides? Hello? Yes. As was said in the beginning by the ambassador, we all face the same challenge, trying to save the economy and save lives at the same time. And the region, especially China, South Korea, suffered in the recent past from SARS and MERS. And the real challenge this time around is we still don't know much about the medical science aspects of these virus that's causing the pandemic. But nevertheless, our region, in a very strange, in a very ironic way, has some experience in vaccine development that virtually the entire world is depending on for containing COVID virus. As was said, now with the help of the internet, that's different from some 15 years ago. We have the regional cooperation mechanisms, either at the China, Japan, Korea forum level, or China, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia, ASEAN level. And these are essential. And then we are all looking forward to more future-oriented efforts of cooperation. Next, please. Now, China has contributed its share to demonstrate solidarity. I'm going to quickly go over that. In April, Prime Minister Li Keqiang spoke at a special summit of ASEAN +3 on COVID-19. That was in many ways an official kickoff an all-of-government approach in the regional cooperation. Roughly a month later, President Xi Jinping pledged at the World Health Assembly meeting that China was going to, among other things, offer its vaccines as a public good for adoption worldwide. And to implement that pledge, materialize that pledge, Indonesia was among the first batch of societies that cooperated with China on vaccine development. And then in September, there were more meetings among foreign ministers and health ministers to more specifically address the pandemic. So we also the good background for that is that all these corporations had a basis in the past. It's not just the pandemic-inspired cooperation. In addition, this time around, you have more Chinese charities and corporations that join the effort to help contain the pandemic. Down, please. I'm not going to go through each of them, but then the region really has good reason for hope, because centered around ASEAN, we've had a good number of mechanisms that specifically devote to public health. So this list is partial, but nevertheless, our ASEAN partners, in this case, Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, Malaysia, and of course, Singapore and others have played a great role, and the WHO's regional office is also very much part of the effort. Can you go on? As we think about moving into the future, I would think timely deployment of COVID vaccines are going to be important. Several things come to my mind. Although it's not that outstanding in Asia or that prominent, you do have temptation of vaccine nationalism in procuring products. I would hope that one way of cooperation is to make science-based decisions rather than nationality-based decisions, the nationality of a product. But then most of our members have signed up to the Gavi's COVAX facility. It's not only one, it's evolving, but nevertheless, it's an additional instrument. Here in Asia, Northeast Asia, and Southeast Asia, we also have vaccine manufacturing capacity. Many of our companies are in this developing country vaccine manufacturing network. So on that basis, I would think moving down the road, we should try to find agreement on travel vaccines for the APT region with the help of the WHO. Malaysia and Myanmar and Indonesia are not in the WHO's Western Pacific region, but nevertheless, they can participate under the 10+3 framework. Vaccines are expensive in many ways, then we could explore procurement pooling of vaccines and other essential medicines. So these are not new ideas, but they should be put into action so that the recovery can be even more spread. Travel continues to be an issue. One way, in addition to the effective deployment of vaccines, we would want to harmonize national rules on travel restrictions. And then we don't just have COVID, we also have other local epidemics where we have other public health challenges. And the trade of active pharmaceutical ingredients and final dosage forms of products should receive good attention. These trade should not be hampered in any way, please. And then to recover the economy, we need more better cooperation in customs procedures. The World Customs Organization plays an important role here. And the existing international supply chains are undergoing some changes, partly due to geopolitics, partly due to the rethinking about the wisdom of reshoring or so-called X-shoring. So we are juggling through many balls at the same time, but we have to bear in mind drastic allocation adversely affects our trading partners' purchase power of imports. So that's in addition to vaccine nationalism, this kind of nationalism of saying, especially government-funded, government encouraged, deploy reshoring or adjustments to supply chains needs to be done with a good deal of prudence. But at the same time, businessmen are busy looking for niche opportunities to continue their operations. To address the power of economic nationalism, production for local distribution is the way to go, and businesses, especially in cross-national investments, should do that as part of a corporate responsibility. Last but not least, here we want to incentivize cross-national investment in public health. This is an issue that probably needs to gain more attention, because after all, we are in the region, we have, like I said before, have both a scientific basis, human network basis, a network of experts, but now if academics and diplomats can come in to give it a bit of a more policy push, hopefully we are going to be able to build on the good tradition, solid tradition of self-help that has been a strong attribute for both CJK and ASEAN. Now, on that note, I think I've used up my time. Thank you very much. I look forward to listening to other presenters and later on during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jia. I think you come up with a couple of very notable points that how do we work together for ease travel restrictions and harmonize our customs procedures, and how to prevent a vaccine nationalism. Those are all serious homework that we need to work on to cope with this corona pandemic, and also to reactivate our economy. And I think we will go into more discussion later. Next, we'll move to Professor Terada Takashi. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and also I'd like to appreciate the TCS for kindly inviting to this quite significant gathering. Again, well, our time is very limited, 10 minutes, but later it's reduced to 8 minutes. So I have only 4 slides, including this cover page. So please go to next page. Okay, well, this page is just to respond to the question, one of the questions raised by TCS, how the individual countries, in my case, Japan's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, again, this is just the description of what happened, and also what the Japanese government has responded or tried to cope with. So there's not necessarily significant in terms of the emphasizing the governmental approaches. But that part could be more useful and important if we have a similar kind of the chart from South Korea and China, particularly to identify the different government approaches or different, say, national or people, citizens, the commitment to the dealing with these pandemic issues. One probably key features in this period of time was, of course, change of the government. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe stepped down, and Yoshihide Suga, a former chief cabinet secretary, now came into power, and just the last month. It seems to me the Suga government will try to work for the coexisting between the pandemic prevention and also the economic recovery. Certainly the unemployment ratio is on the increase. And unfortunately, suicide ratio is also increasing as well. So in this case, the finding job, keeping the employment is also important for citizens, not only in my country, but also other countries as well. So the chart actually described particularly some sort of the different, sorry, it's still I'm talking a previous page, sorry. Yeah, thank you. The first patient just discovered in January, and the cancellation of Tokyo. Well, it's not cancellation; it's postponed Tokyo Olympic Games, and also the sort of emergency closure. Yes, and the schools are closed, and workers are just requested to stay home using their computer for their businesses, etc. So simply economic was shut down. But now we are encouraged to go different prefectures and as tourists and spend more money. But interestingly, half of the cost has been covered by the government, tax. So I just came back from Tokyo, and we are just given the coupon to buy a lot of things and just to stimulate the economies. So I think towards the next year, I know the winter time might be a bit difficult time for us, but nevertheless, we should, stimulate the economy. Otherwise, our future is going to be existing. Okay, please go to next page. Again, I'm not, the expert, and I'm not a medical scientist. So I don't know how we can explain the low ratio of the Japanese patient as well as the mortality ratio as well. But just this week I had a news report that the number of the patients affected by flu, it's much smaller than previous years. So in this case, the people now wearing masks, washing hands everywhere, even my universities, in front of every classroom, this sort of the washing machines installed. And also not to talk on public, these sort of the cultures or customs, habits which Japanese people have, the established maybe over a century, could be probably interesting point for us to look at. And just the old picture just showed it's written, described 1922, 100 years ago. Even we are wearing a mask, and since then, in wintertime, wearing a mask is a common scenery, particularly not to carry the virus of the cold and etc. And the yellow soaps, which could be probably familiar to the relatively older people, maybe my generation and older, and as elementary schools, we are advised to use these yellow soaps in 1970s and 80s. And so we are simply doing what we have done so far. That could be probably useful as well for preventing the pandemic, the COVID-19 through the nations. Again, there's no scientific explanations on this. Anyway, go to the next page, please. Okay, this is the final page. Again, economy is important. And recently, ASEAN +3 finance ministers and also central bank governors meeting was just held. This is a quite significant meeting, I thought, because when the crisis happened, 1997 Asian financial crisis, 2008 transatlantic crisis or Lehman shock, so-called, took place. This ASEAN +3 framework was enlarged, and even this time as well. And then I read some report on this meeting, and also looking at this image, because my question was, where was the TCS? Given the fact that ASEAN Secretariat actually dispatched its own representative, I think it's a Deputy Secretary General on Economic Affairs, was actually participating in this meeting, together with other international organizations like ADB or AMRO and IMF Asia Pacific Office, together with those financial political leaders from the ASEAN +3 countries. So I think later we discuss more on that, but the TCS needs to be probably more encouraged to promote financial or economic issues to help our three nations and citizens. But APT is the only institution in this region which has a very concrete mechanism for helping particularly currencies. As you may know, the developing countries, most of them in this world, 73, according to the World Bank, is in a crisis of the sovereign default. And recent G20 just tried to set up the framework for extending the deadline for repayment. But APT has a different. These countries also crisis, or in a sense a threat of their currencies being sharply devaluated. Then we have sort of the same initiative, multilateralization, CMIM, and those countries already agreed to promote the liquidities in such a crisis countries. I think this mechanism just started since 2000 in Chiang Mai after observing the Asian financial crisis. Just expanded gradually. And this time, finally, not only the US dollars, but also regional currencies like Japanese yen or Chinese yuan, these monies also could be available in this, the CMIM framework. So probably APT could be a more useful and could be probably expanded, in terms of the, for example, money available. But of course, TCS involvement could be also important, and particularly as a lender rather than borrowers. And of course, more financial cooperation among three countries could be also helpful, and as an additional sort of the assistant mechanism. Looking at 2008, very first TCS or CJK summit meeting held in Fukuoka, the statement actually clearly mentioned the significance of financial cooperation among three countries. But it seems to me it's not necessarily realized yet. So just looking at 12 years ago, and also another crisis we are facing, so TCS, the emergence as a more economy-oriented framework should be welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Terada. Japan is quite uniquely responding to this corona pandemic. You said that your decades old, maybe century old, unique culture and practice help mitigating this spread of a pandemic. On the other hand, in other parts of the world, when they have a different culture and practice, somehow it's the pandemic is uncontrollable. But and also it's quite notable that you mentioned that TCS should enhance its role as somehow in the field of economics. I think we could discuss that further. Next, Dr. Che Eun-mi from Asan Institute, please.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Eunmi Choi. I'm an associate research fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you for having me today, and it's my pleasure to share my opinion and the analysis about COVID-19 crisis with these distinguished international scholars. In this dialogue, I am supposed to present South Korea's case about COVID-19 among the 5 presenters. So I would like to introduce the Republic of Korea's response to COVID-19 and its impact in Korea. And additionally, I would like to discuss regional cooperation. Like other presenters, I've got 3 questions as well. First, the impact of COVID-19. Second, the national and regional efforts fighting against the pandemic and revitalizing economy and people-to-people exchange. Third, the next steps for intergovernmental and inter-regional effort in the new normal era. Next, please. So based on these questions, I divided my presentations into 4 parts. First, I will show the current situation of COVID-19 in South Korea. Next, I will introduce the national and regional efforts under the COVID-19 pandemic. Following that, I will analyze its impact in Korea. Lastly, I will suggest the next steps against the backdrop of the new normal. Next, please. Then let's begin with the current situation in South Korea. It was January 20th, the first COVID-19 case was reported in South Korea. Then we've had 2 big waves so far. The first wave was February to March around Daegu and Gyeongsang province. And the second wave was August around the Seoul city and the Gyeonggi province. Recently, we have around 70 cases per day. Next, please. So let's see more specifically. As you can see on this slide, we have over 25,000 confirmed cases as of October 19th, 2020. And today, KCDC reported the accumulation of confirmed cases is around 26,000. While some people are still suffering from this infectious disease and around 500 people have died. So we can see some regional breakdown of confirmed cases and cluster outbreaks. So we cannot underestimate it. Therefore, South Korean government has been trying to overcome the COVID-19 crisis. Next, please. However, compared to the other countries, such as the United States and India, who are first and the second-ranked countries in the world, South Korea has responded relatively well to COVID-19. Not only the number of confirmed cases, but also the mortality rate is relatively low. Like other countries, the economic situation has gotten worse, but we didn't have social chaos. Although it is difficult to evaluate the Republic of Korea's response to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, currently I think COVID-19 in the Republic of Korea is relatively under control compared to other countries, at least so far. Next, please. So then how has South Korea handled COVID-19? Let me elaborate on the South Korea's response to COVID-19. In this slide, you can see South Korea is conducting wide-ranging and active inspections, transparent information disclosure, and rapid and proactive measures based on the legal framework and response preparation established after MERS in 2015. South Korea's response to COVID-19 is known as K-quarantine, and it set an example for many countries. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. South Korea has pointed out, test, trace, and treat the basic factors against the epidemic. Also, it propels the trust campaign, which emphasizes transparency, responsibility, united actions, science and speed, and together in solidarity. Next, please. Furthermore, the Korean government encouraged people to fight against COVID-19 with various campaigns, such as Thanks to Challenge and Stay Strong campaign. Also, it has suggested and given some guidelines, such as prevention guidelines and social distancing guidelines. Next, please. With these kind of efforts, I think South Korea could get domestic and international trust and have pride about quarantine. Also, it helps to widen the scope of Korean diplomacy. We can look at not only great powers surrounding the Korean peninsula, but also developing countries, and find areas and roles in which the Republic of Korea can lead cooperation and contribute to worldwide peace. However, still we have some challenges. One is our emotionally charged responses to neighboring countries, especially China and Japan. You may remember we have some arguments about entry issues from China and face masks issues between Korea and Japan. The other is the awareness of personal information disclosure. We need to think about how to balance national interest and personal interest under national crisis. Next, please. Then, what are the impacts of the COVID-19 in Korea? In the perspective of political side, although COVID-19 has been controlled to some extent, some related issues were politically abused. For example, we can see the restriction of freedom of assembly. Also, in the perspective of economic side, even though there was no choice but to set up a disaster relief fund, maybe we may suffer from the dropping national finance and the exploding debt and the increasing tax. Lastly, in the social aspect, we have increasing a contact-free society. We can see it workplace, school, and social meetings like today's meeting. I believe we will adjust this new normal society and respond quickly to the changes. However, simultaneously, it exposed a wealth gap between households and mental health issues brought on by prolonged quarantine and other measures. Next, please. So for the next steps under COVID-19 crisis, we need to think of something more at the another level. We remember at the beginning of the outbreak of COVID-19, the first response of each country was to close its borders. It's very hard to cooperate with each other, even though we always say that the importance for regional cooperation when transnational crisis happens. Next, please. So I think it's time to think how to restore the relationship between countries, especially geographically close countries, and how to build cooperation system when transnational crisis comes again. We may make a platform such as Health Community, which is Northeast Asia version of WHO for sharing information and resources within the region. For the long-term perspective, we need to devise new ways to build network and connection between people and find ways to minimize the damage that could happen if we don't meet in person. We can think more ways to develop our relations in this new normal society. I would welcome any comments and questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Che Eun-mi. Among others, I can take note of your idea of establishing or making a region, Northeast Asia or East Asia version of WHO. Definitely, many other regions, they have among their cooperative mechanism in the region, they usually have some health cooperative mechanism. Probably there could be one of the project that they could be working on. And when we talk about the Korea's responses to this pandemic, Koreans are saying that they are doing just fine. They are doing quite good at responding to this. But still, one of the reasons they are paying attention to or taking note of is that they had a very serious epidemic 2015, so-called MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. Since Korean society was hit very hard with that MERS, so we Koreans are much better prepared now this time. And now let's move to Professor Kwik Jung Chi from Malaysia. Please.
Thanks very much, Professor Chung, for your kind introduction. And thanks for the organizer, TCS, for having me here. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me provide a Southeast Asian perspective, or perhaps I should say a maritime Southeast Asian perspective on the dynamics of multi-layered cooperation in COVID-19 era. I have only 4 slides, including this structural presentation. So I have only 1 slide for each of the 3 points that you are seeing. The first is about the emerging geopolitical trends. The second, about the evolving strategic narratives across the powers. And finally, which is most important one, it's about the enduring and also the expanding multi-layered cooperation, cooperative nets in the COVID-19 era, which I'm going to talk a little bit about the ASEAN Plus and also the TCN Plus and also beyond. So next slide, please. We in Southeast Asia, I would say both maritime Southeast Asia and also mainland Southeast Asia, we see the current situation not just as one crisis, it's multiple crises. We are seeing not just about the pandemic crisis, we are also seeing economic crisis for some countries, political crisis, and most importantly, we are also seeing some unprecedented geopolitical tension, crisis, or uncertainties. And many observers have began to talk about Cold War 2.0. I put a question mark there precisely because of it is still a debate, and some different scholars or different institutions would have a different take about it. And the reason why we are talking about all these geopolitical issues is precisely because of these are the kind of top-down global phenomena that whether we like it or not, they are going to affect almost everybody, including how and to what extent, in what way we could collaborate, either on the public health issues like the pandemic or even in other aspects. So some are saying like we are entering into a Cold War 2.0 because of US-China animosity and rivalry are becoming more open, more intense, and also more confrontational. But however, I think unfortunately, we do see some differences between the current round of Cold War 2.0 with the earlier round during the last century. There are a number of differences. I think one big difference is that, of course, the presence of interdependence, not just between US and China, but basically China and also all US allies and also partners. So that's one big difference between the current round of Cold War with the earlier round, and it does have an impact on how we collaborate at the regional level. And the other difference between the current and also the last round of bipolar competition is we are seeing not just about the economic interdependence, we are also seeing the presence of regional multilateralism. I think during the Cold War period, we don't see any big and thick regional multilateral layers of cooperation in East Asia. And right now, the fact that we have a TCS, we have the ASEAN Plus 3, and all sort of ASEAN Plus cooperation, those are evidences of we are seeing the presence of regional multilateral cooperation as something that distinguishes the current round of Cold War with the earlier round. And most importantly, I will also highlight that we are seeing a Cold War 2.0 that is taking place, not just on one single chessboard, but twin chessboard of big power rivalry. Twin chessboard in the sense that the big powers are not only competing on the military chessboard, but also non-military, including infrastructure development, including supply chain cooperation, also in terms of other functional issues such as public health. And all this situation has given space, I would argue, that allow smaller countries, including Southeast Asia, but also beyond, for pursuing hedging behavior. And we are hedging in the sense that none of the smaller countries are putting all eggs in one single basket. And all countries in Southeast Asia also are trying to diversify our strategic and also development links, including partnership for public health, such as the COVID, and hedging also in the sense that we try to prevent a regional multi-polarization in any sense. So which brings me to my next slide. So these power dynamics are giving rise to evolving and also competing strategic narrative. So number one, we can divide that into three clusters of narratives. So number one, of course, is about the US-centered Indo-Pacific, about Quad Plus, that is very much a focus on security, be it military security or non-military security, to emphasize about the rules-based order, decoupling, so on and so forth. We knew that in April, there were Quad Plus a meeting about the COVID, the cooperation. Although it provided more channel to discuss this issue, some scholars, definitely some observers in Southeast Asia, are worrying about the increasing possibility of a polarization if this trend continues, because we know that there is a competing strategic narrative on the part of a China-centered narrative. We talk about China's Belt and Road Initiative, the Eurasian integration, development, a community of common destiny, that in a way is trying to offset and prevent countries from aligning too close with the United States and also its allies. And hence, the importance of the third set of a narrative about the ASEAN-centered, ASEAN centrality that emphasizes about inclusivity, autonomy, and the relevancy of a regional multilateralism. And this is actually, I would say, the most accepted narrative so far, precisely because of the non-aligning position that ASEAN is taking on various issues, but particularly on the public health COVID cooperation. Which brings me to the next and also the last slide that I'm going to share with you. And the reason, there are multiple reasons why we emphasize about the importance of multi-layered cooperation. Cooperation has always been multi-layered, but this is a more important time to ensure and also to expand all kind of multi-track cooperation. So here our focus is about ASEAN plus 3. Earlier speakers, Terada and also Professor Cha and also Dr. Trey has already mentioned about various ASEAN mechanism and also ASEAN plus 3 mechanism. I would highlight that in fact we could also bear in mind the possibility of the reverse dynamics. It's not just about ASEAN plus 3. We could also foresee, and in fact I think we should bear in mind, encourage the possibility of a TCS plus cooperation. So it's not just the ASEAN plus. In certain circumstances, certain areas which ASEAN simply do not have enough capacity, we should consider TCN plus cooperation. Here my one example that I would put forward is about the possibility of establishing a ASEAN plus 3 CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention. We know that in the European region, there is a EU CDC, but clearly in East Asia, in ASEAN plus 3 region, we do not have such mechanism. And I do think that during COVID-19 or even the post-pandemic era, we should seriously think about having a regional, East Asian-wide regional CDC. And the focus can be not just about having information sharing about having the early warning system, but I think very importantly, clearly we need to take more seriously, more resources, more attention about establishing a stockpile for emergency materials, so on and so forth. And even the issue of a vaccine multilateralism. Earlier speaker talked about the danger of a vaccine nationalism. And I think the solution or the approaches that we should emphasize here, and in which ASEAN plus 3 and also TCS and TCS plus should play a bigger role, is about vaccine multilateralism. So the kind of a region-wide CDC would allow us to materialize such a direction. Vaccine materialism, they will allow us to also put forward and also pay attention to other related areas such as public health capacity building, information sharing, economic revitalization, people-to-people connectivity in the new normal, and more importantly, some human security cooperation aspects, such as the emergency stockpile. With that, I will stop my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Quick. I can see that you are following very closely this great power politics and politics of small and medium-sized countries, how they're responding. And here in your presentation, I would like to take note of your suggestion of multi-layered cooperative nets in this era of uncertainty and the US-China strategic competition. Certainly, I think we need more than one or two safety cooperative mechanisms to diffuse these or risks. Thank you very much. And finally, but never the least, we have Director General, Deputy Director General To-Min Ju. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? So can you hear me? Can I start now? Good afternoon. Hello. Okay, so I would like to start. First of all, I would like to thank the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat for inviting me to share my thought on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and regional cooperations from the Vietnam's perspective. So actually, I have a few slides, but because of the time limit, I will be very quick. First of all, I would like to give you some background on the information of the situation in Vietnam. As you see, with a population of almost 100 million people, we are now having 96 million people. Vietnam was extremely vulnerable to the pandemic, which began in our neighboring China. But as today, Vietnam's Ministry of Health confirmed a total of just over 1,170 cases of the COVID-19, and most of them has been recovered. Unfortunately, we already recorded 35 deaths due to the pandemic. Actually, with that, we are still having the lowest fertility rate among the lowest in the world. The next slide, please. So how we have achieved that, if I call it some achievement. I think as a developing country, we could not afford expensive testing equipment just like South Korea, or we cannot utilize efficient medical system like China. So we have to rely a lot on our citizens for cooperations. We employed several measures. For example, for administrative measures, we are quite early. We have quite early actions. Or we closed down some of the cities as soon as we discovered the cases, and we also implement very meticulous contact tracing. Not only the first contact, but also the second, even the third and the fourth contact. So with that, I think we have a good data on contact people. Especially, we employed massive public communication and very strong propaganda. If you follow some of the news from Vietnam, you can see that in during the early period of the pandemic, we have a very interesting propaganda through the song, through like poster on the street, which is and some of the posters are very interesting and eye-catching, and everyone can understand and follow. besides administrative measures, we recognize that it is important to have economic measures. So like many other countries, I think we also learn from our neighboring country. We provide short-term financial support, and we gradually opening the city and the areas of COVID contracted. But we also applied long-term economic restructuring, and especially with this difficult period, we recognize that it is a time, and it is really probably an opportunity for Vietnam to implement like digital transformation. But overall, I think what we have seen so far is very strong political leadership, and what we can call an own government approach, own government and people approach. Next slide, please. So I will be quick, but in short, like we have, I think what we have so far is the very severe impact on the economy, on GDP, on the number of enterprise suspended. We have millions of people lost their job in a time, and also people who have to cut their working hours, and also FDI, which is very important for the Vietnamese economy, have been dropped by 15% this time compared to last year. Next slide, please. But actually, we also see some bright side. If we compare Vietnam with other ASEAN countries, I think we are one of a few countries who still recorded positive growth and expected to have about 2% growth this year, compared with some other countries who saw a decrease by, say, from 3 to 8%. And we also see some opportunities to attract investment since Vietnam has proved to be a safe destination for investors. And I think that strengthens our comparative advantage as attractive investment destinations. With that, we also focus on economic restructuring and digital transformations. On the political impact, I think there's two sides. On one side, I think the Vietnamese, with very strong political determination, the government of Vietnam has gained more support from the people. To some extent, we can enhance our prestige of Vietnam in the international arena. But on the other hand, we have to adjust many of our plans, for example, our national development plan, and also we have to adjust our foreign policy agendas. And there's a lot of challenges because this year Vietnam took the chairmanship role of ASEAN. So the next slide, please. The second part of my presentation will focus on regional cooperation. I think if we look at ASEAN framework, there's numerous actions and initiatives on coping with the COVID-19. So here I just want to highlight some of them. What I think is the most important, I think, is the ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund and the ASEAN Regional Reserve of Medical Supplies and Standard Operating Procedures for public health emergency response. And these initiatives will be passed. I think the TORs are now reviewed by the ASEAN Coordinating Unit and will be passed, will be recognized as a summit leaders meeting later next month. And next slide, please. And within the ASEAN +3 framework, I think we have also recorded some of the very important initiatives. For example, we have achieved the ASEAN +3 plan of action on mitigating the economic impact of the COVID-19, and just a few months ago. And in that, the ASEAN and the 3 country, the +3 country have agreed to keep markets open for trade and investment and strengthening the economic resiliencies. Next slide, please. So what is the next step for the regional cooperation in the new normal? I think there are two things, or probably just like some of my thought. The first thing, I think we should take full advantage of existing cooperative mechanisms. If you look at the current existing ASEAN +3, we can see there's many already existing mechanisms. And I think here, I would like to focus on the two things. The first one is the ASEAN +3 logistic cooperation for future trade facilitation. And the second one is the cooperation on health. I think these are the two important things. One is on economic restructuring, and the other one on health cooperation. And the other part of the next step is to pivot as a potential area of cooperation, including trade and investment connectivity. We need to focus and implement more rigorously the framework for digital integration in ASEAN, the ASEAN connectivity, ASEAN personal data protection, and ASEAN strategic plan for SME. So I think digital connectivity and the support for SMEs are very important. Actually, I forgot to put here, but I think one of the things that I would like to mention is the finalization of the RCEP, the regional the ASEAN +6, actually now not including India, free trade agreement, the RCEP, which expected to be signed at the end of this year. And I think this is very important foundations for the ASEAN and the +3 country, and also Australia and New Zealand to work together to overcome this difficult time, restructuring and the economy of all of our country, and to bring free trade and investment to the regions. So with that, I would like to end my presentation here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Do. We have 5 excellent presentations. I think all of us here and in the online must have learned a lot from your presentations. There was a saying, English saying that don't waste a crisis. You know, crisis takes a lot of high toll, humanly, financially. So when we have a crisis, you know, people respond, and we should have learned lessons from it. So we should not repeat the same mistakes. And when we recover from the crisis, I think we should be in much better positions. I think when we are hearing all your presentations, and if we could follow your suggestions, I believe that we could be much better positioned to tackle this and the next centuries. And especially in Dr. To's presentation, I could see that you know, ASEAN countries and you know, East Asian countries have played this connectivity and centrality in terms of physical sense, physical centrality, physical connectivity. But as we are, while we are experiencing this pandemic, we are entering really new era of digital age. So I hope that this East Asian or ASEAN centrality or connectivity could be also transformed to be fitting into this digital age, you know, so that we could have digital connectivity and digital centrality of this area in coming decades. Now we have only about, I believe, 10 minutes. I think all important things have been said, but I want to ask you very quick questions to each one of you. And considering very limited time, I will shorten my question, and I also expect quick answers from your side. Let me talk to first Dr. Jia Taojun. I think this East Asia is performing very well in this pandemic era. So how this area, Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, could contribute to the world response to pandemic and the world response to economic recovery. I think we used to see from Western countries an example what to do, but this time East Asian countries are doing it pretty well. So what kind of lessons or example we could provide to the world?
That's a very tough question. Having in mind what our speaker from Malaysia said about the large geostrategic pictures, I would think we can do four things. First is to let the epistemic communities of scientists, medical doctors, and professionals to do their work, minimizing as much political, diplomatic considerations as possible. And secondly, yes, you are right. Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, we have, especially as outlined by our Vietnamese speaker, we have done quite well, and we have a lot to celebrate, but nevertheless, we need to be modest, and especially here in China, we should refrain from the celebratory or jubilant mode of presenting what experiences we may have. The third point is that let's remember the production of needed medical equipment facilities are still as essential together with medicine for everyday use. Here in Northeast Asia, we should do everything possible to keep the machineries of production going and satisfy the needs of the rest of the world, not just for trade, but for good humanitarian reasons. Last but not least, I think our Malaysian speaker mentioned that we could probably demonstrate to the rest of the world that one way to cooperate is to prepare for the next pandemic, for the future. Think about speeding up the establishment of an emergency medical stockpile mechanism. Actually, under the 10+3 framework, we have done quite well in terms of emergency rice stockpile sharing. So those are the four things that readily come to my mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. In fact, I think that's when seeing this short supply of medical equipment, I think we could have some strategic stockpiling of those equipments in the region and for the world. Thank you very much. Next, my question goes to Dr. Terada and Chair Mi. This Northeast Asia region is, especially when you look at the region, this area is somehow compared to other regions. This regional cooperative spirit, customs, practice much less developed than other areas. So how do we have a much, more developed regional cooperative mechanisms like in Southeast Asia? What should we do and what the TCS can do? What are your suggestions to the TCS and to our policy communities? Terada, go ahead first.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, it's very difficult because it's related to politics and only 3 nations. So once, the one angle of the triangle became troublesome, simply trilateral cooperation would be also troublesome as well. So in this case, as often happening. Once China-Korea relationship became troublesome, Korea needed to rely on China. So, these countries sometimes, they provide some critical comments and even not to participate in some of the meetings, summit meetings with Japanese leaders. So this sort of the behaviors continue to exist over the last two, probably decades something. So I think the bilateralism is the basics for any sort of the major, particularly the economic cooperation. So I think the China-Japan and Korea-Japan and also Korea-China relationship, these three, the bilateral relationship should be, the maintained or stabilized. I think that's a very fundamental question. And the second problem, as I mentioned in the last slide, before the Northeast Asian regionalism started, already there are a couple of the major regional institutions existing. One is ASEAN Plus 3 and our APEC, and even Secretariat established just 10 years ago, right? East Asian Summit was already created. So this sort of the overlapping to some extent, regional institutions in Asia was quite also a significant factor we have to consider. Again, why we need China-Japan Korea cooperation. This is sort of the first question we needed to address 10 years ago, because the ASEAN Plus 3 or maybe other ASEAN-based framework provided the platform for three nations to come together. So in this case, we need a very strong agenda for three nations to commonly identify as three nations problems. But if these problems are also shared by other countries, like COVID-19 or financial problems, the other framework I mentioned before will tend to be constantly more effective in a sense. So I think most important element is to find out the quite strong reasons why only three nations come together. So it seems to me three nations certainly share a number of problems, but not sure what is the most significant, the area which only common three nations can do together. We have already RCEP, as Sama mentioned. It's a East Asian wide integration in which Japan, China, Korea already involved. So as I mentioned, it's related to the first point. If not in a strong and cooperative or friendly relationship bilaterally, it's still difficult for three nations to come together to create the common voice, even they join, as a region or bigger regional frameworks. So again, let me repeat, it's simply basic bilateralism. That's very important. Without the good relationship bilaterally, I think it's very difficult.
Thank you. Seems to that we still have a long way to go. I somehow, as a moderator, I think I almost failed in time management. We have our time is almost up, but I think we may. Can you use just a couple more minutes? Is it okay? Yeah. I will shorten my statement, and I will ask you to have only. I'm sorry to say this, but each of you have only 1 minute to say. So please, Dr. Chairman, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the question. I have a lot of things to talk about it, but because of the time limit, I just want to say just one thing. And I want to suggest very specific idea. That is that to make a regular or special expert group meetings for Northeast Asia cooperation. It could be updated version of EASG or EAVG, which was activated in the late of 1990s and in the early of 2000s. So with this expert group, I think we can check and develop the ways for cooperation in the changing society. And fortunately, we have TCS, and I believe TCS can be the great mechanism to enhance regional cooperation platform. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry to give you such a push. Now I invite Dr. Quick and Dr. Min to both of you. As we know, in this area, East Asia is somehow still fictional. we talk about either TCS plus or ASEAN plus. We need to make really, East Asian, not just a plus, just one, So how do we do it? How do we have really East Asian regional supply of chain? How do we have some regional community practices so that we could be prepared for much better in this preparation against the pandemic or any other political economic situations? I'd like to hear some of your suggestions. Let's begin with Dr. Quick, please.
It's precisely, can you hear me? All right. Your question precisely highlight why I emphasize about the multi-layered cooperation, because of its necessity to actually have more than one channel. So depending on the severity, also the nature of the issue, sometimes we need a bilateral, as what Professor Terada mentioned early on, but at times we need the minilateralism, multilateralism, and going concurrently. When we talk about multilateralism, it's not just about ASEAN +3, but also clearly a TCS and also TCS plus. And just take one very important, I would say, the most important crucial issue when it comes to COVID cooperation is about vaccine. Vaccine cooperation clearly needs, I would say, multi-layered kind of collaboration, and it's not necessarily just to have a one-size-fits-all solution, precisely because of the 3R issues of we are facing resources problem. Many countries simply do not have on our own to have a resources and capacity to develop vaccine. So we need a multilateral and multi-layered approach to develop that. And the second R is about the relationship. At the time of intense big power polarity and also competition, we need to diversify. A multi-layered way is a way of managing the relationship issue. So the second R is relationship. And finally, the third R is about the reliability. So we want not just vaccine, but vaccine that is reliable. And this cannot be done, I think, by any one single actor and any one layer, and hence the multi-layered cooperation. And ASEAN +3 would be the ideal framework to build upon, because of many policy connectivity has already been placed. What you need to do is just to add the multiple layers into what we already are seeing. Yeah. I will stop here.
Thank you. Dr. Do, please.
Yeah, so I think it is very important questions that you posed. From my point of view, I think it is important to have the official multi-layers, like the Associate Professor Q have said. But I think another way to look at it is that we should have a more diversified mechanisms. For example, we should look at a multi-stakeholders approach. I am the coordinators for Vietnam in the ASEAN +3 network of think tanks. And I think it is a good place to start with. But unfortunately, so far, even the Track 2 think tank network has not been utilized by government officers from ASEAN and from the +3 country. So we should diversify not only to look at government to government, but also like a research institute and other stakeholders cooperation mechanisms. Then, then we could go from that, and then I think with very different and diversified mechanisms, I think the +3 country, I mean the TSC and ASEAN, we can work together, and then I think maybe not in a long run, but in a medium run, we could come to a more closer and let's say kind of communities as we vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me thank you very much, doctors and the professors. I think we have excellent discussions. Let me conclude with a very short 3 sentences. I hope that we are really in short of time I think we can have another dialogue like this with the permission and the participation of TCS at our institute, the KNDA, if you like. And secondly, we could confirm the needs of regional cooperation, bigger and more. And I think we can do that. I think we need to work on that. And also, I'd like to propose that we also talk a lot about the national interest, but I'd like to propose that why don't we think about the regional interest when we look at the issues? And thirdly, when we continue this dialogue next year, I hope that there could be, instead of untagged, but it could be a face-to-face meeting. By that time, we overcome this pandemic, and we hope to see you in a healthy way. My final role as a moderator is to invite Deputy Secretary General Zhao Jing for her concluding remarks.
Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the dialogue. With your permission, let me make just a few closing remarks. I'll be very brief. Everyone would agree what a splendid dialogue this has been. I'd like to thank all our speakers for contributing to these productive discussions today. I also thank all the audience for their active participation, in particular, those who have stayed with us until now. I'm very pleased to have been exposed to such a wide variety of viewpoints during this dialogue. Our speakers have done great jobs to review the impacts of COVID-19 in their respective country or the region at large, and brought up insightful observations and valuable recommendations about our next steps. The TCS has noted down all of them and will, if necessary, share with relevant stakeholders so as to further promote the ideal exchange and practical cooperation on fighting COVID-19 and economic recovery. We'll continue this dialogue in the future. I will echo what most speakers have said. To overcome today's fragilities, we need more international cooperation and strengthened multilateralism. As UN Secretary General Guterres said, when countries go in their own direction, the virus goes in every direction. We must be united. We must act in solidarity. Therefore, exchanges, mutual learning, and collaboration in combating the pandemic are extremely important and necessary. Today's dialogue marks a significant attempt by the TCS as we are mandated to promote peace and prosperity of the region. Yet there's still so much to be done. Next year marks the 10th anniversary of TCS. It's a new beginning for us, and we are ready to listen to your insightful ideas and suggestions on how we could support the trilateral cooperation better. Once again, thank you everyone for your valuable contributions today. We look forward to meeting you, welcome you offline to the TCS event in the post-pandemic era. Now, I have to declare the closure of today's dialogue. Thank you.